Well, good morning and welcome everybody for joining us both in the Empower Living community and in the Christian Simpson community. Christian, how are you, my friend? Good to see you.
I'm very well, Paul. Great to see you. You're looking really well, unlike my paleness here in the UK. I've not even got any of the color you've got.
Well, I've got an excuse. I live in Florida, although I have to take vitamin D because I never get to see the sun either. So, but thanks for doing this. You and I both just 2 weeks ago kind of woke up to the news that really our mentor, probably one of the most important mentors in our life. I mean, we both have had several, but certainly probably one of the most profound mentors I had, Bob Proctor, had passed away. And I had written a post that day, and then I saw your post as I was reading others, tributing, and acknowledging Bob's, part in people's lives. And I thought, you and I should probably do something to memorialize Bob and to pay tribute to him. And that's what today's all about. So thanks for jumping in and sharing this, because for many of you who may be joining, you may not have had the opportunity to learn directly from Bob Proctor, but I assure you, if you've learned anything from Christian and you've learned anything from me, then you've learned something from Bob Proctor for sure. Because without doubt, everything that I teach and probably everything that Christian teaches, and certainly everything I've learned since I've met Bob, has been filtered through his thinking. And in my post, I mentioned that Bob is probably the last true speaker that goes back to the lineage of Troward and James Allen and Emerson and Thoreau and Carlyle and Fillmore and Nightingale and Fleet and Hill and James Allen and Maltz. I mean, very few people have lived as long as Bob lived and studied as deeply as Bob studied. And, it was funny because I was first introduced to Bob Proctor in 1991. And if you think about back in 1991, all the rage was everybody going to see the Giant, Anthony Robbins, and they were all going to, walk on, hot coals. And here I was, kind of studying with my mentor, Patrick Hayes, and this Canadian, redheaded guy in Canada. And, all the focus was on studying dead masters, right, and their teaching. And so to this day, I've never gone to, I've never been to an Anthony Robbins seminar. I've never done it because I missed that whole thing. Because once Patrick turned me on to Napoleon Hill and Bob's teaching, I did whatever Bob said to do. I read whatever Bob said to read. And I just kind of, I listened to one voice.
Yeah, I did actually end up at UPW for a couple of years in my journey. I think, Tony's work, when it comes to charisma and it comes to impact, Tony Robbins, amazing. Yeah. And, but, it's very much, for me personally, I can't speak for other people. It was very much a gateway into a deeper understanding, a willingness to search. And that search in England, Bob Proctor wasn't a name that ever really came on the radar, Paul. And through a person that we both came to know, it was much later than you. I wasn't awakened to personal growth until 96 when somebody put Stephen Covey's, Habits of Highly Effective People in my hand, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I read it insatiably, but didn't address any of the exercises in it. So I knew a lot, but not a lot changed. But then it was 2006 that an ex-working colleague of mine who was a life success at the time gave me Winner's Image and the program Winner's Image, Bob's program. And, I was listening to this guy, and the program just, it kind of ate away at me, Paul. I'll be frank with you. At the time, being in the state of awareness that I was in, I remember about 3/4 of the way through, and this is simply from the awareness I was at the time. And I want to really point this out because I think it leads to a really profound understanding of just how profound the impact of Bob's work is in my life and my work. Is that Bob mentions the G word, the God word, and at that time in my life, I almost put that program in the trash because of it, because of my lack of awareness. of what he was referring to. But I stuck with it. I followed the workbook. I did it 3 or 4 times, and I came to value that program. I still hadn't quite penny dropped, but that was where my journey started with Bob. And then the individual that introduced me to Bob invited me to come to your joint operation with Bob in Florida, and I landed in West Palm Beach in June 2007, and came to your fantastic training there. I think it wasn't even at Delray then. I don't think it was. Yeah. And it just blew my mind. And I'll share this with you because how it started is that Cheryl Smith, as we now know her, Cheryl, we worked with her for a long time, both of us. Your operations lady and right hand lady. You built a relationship with Cheryl in those days, because she was helping you with the whole travel arrangements and so forth. And being an inquisitive fellow that I am, I was asking Cheryl about the operation and how it all works, and she told me about this guy. Who this Martinelli fella, who was so focused on the client experience that he would go around that beautiful hotel there on the shore, and just down from you in Jupiter, and if you found a slight stain on any of the chairs in the room, you would not have that room for any of your Life Success participants. Now that was a completely different level of leadership for me. I hadn't seen that. And I became fascinated with this guy as well as the main name. And then I'd get up and this was in subsequent trainings that I came to. I asked Cheryl if she'd allow me to set up the room with her, because I've not seen behind the scenes of events like that before. Even though I've been to UPW, I was only a participant, and that started my whole journey off with Bob and with yourself. And little did I know where that relationship with you would take me.
Well, Bob had a way of scrambling everybody's eggs. If you spent any time with Bob, he was going to absolutely scramble your eggs. And I remember, Bob talking about how, because when I first started, he was introducing this concept of God and spirituality to the work. And I remember him just telling me that, there's others who teach material, the same kind of idea of kind of manifestation, but they leave out the spiritual component. He says it's not that they're not any good, it's just that they're incomplete. And, and that certainly scrambled people's eggs. And to my knowledge, he's probably still the only person. He was probably still the only person that would introduce the spiritual component into this type of work. And he opened the door for many others who had that desire to bring spirituality into the work. He made it safe for them to do that. But I remember there's so many different stories I had with Bob. There was one where I was flying to London for my first seminar. And in my post, I have a picture of me and Bob in that room in London. I'm holding a gold card. Somebody's taking the picture of me and Bob in front of the room. The audience is behind us. And on that gold card, I had written that gold card, I don't know, maybe 10 years before, that I was going to meet Bob Proctor. I was going to be his business partner. I was going to travel the world with him. And so here I was, his partner. I had sold my cleaning business, and now I was his partner. This was my first seminar with him. And I remember I was going to meet him at the airport. I got off the plane, and I had flown from Miami to London, and I was in row, 87. I was in seat K. I was between two guys who had kind of eaten curry goat for the last 6 years of their life. And I was squirred away, as Bob would say, kind of waiting and begging for peanuts from the waitress.
Like the squirrel.
And I walk off the plane and I'm going to meet Bob at this coffee shop. And there's Bob. He had arrived maybe 2 hours earlier, and he's in the uniform, right? He's got his, his 3-piece vest suit on, he looks like $1 million. Bob is a good looking guy, he's tall, and he's got this shocking white hair, and he's there and he's drinking coffee, and he looks like he's on the cover of like Cigar Aficionado or GQ magazine. And I look like I just flew for 9 hours in the aluminum can between two guys who ate curry goat. And he looks at me, he says, you look like, he says the word, you look like,
Yeah.
And he said, I said, oh man, I had a terrible flight. I didn't sleep at all. He said, and he looked at me and said, you didn't fly first class? And I was like, well, no. He said, well, why not? And I said, well, the seat was like $9,000 to fly first class. And he said, so? And I said, well, and so I immediately went to what we all do. We justify our limiting beliefs. So I immediately went to, well, I wanted to be a good steward of the company money, and I hadn't booked in advance. And, I was still thinking like you and I, we fly to work. Now if I'm going someplace, I don't think about booking in advance. I pick the next flight and I go. And so I sat down and Bob said, so let me just understand this. He said, so you're not worth the $9,000. And I said, no, I'm worth. He said, no, you're not. You don't believe you're worth $9,000. I said, no, it's not that. He said, yes, it is that. And he's just scrambling my eggs, man. He's just, he said, no, he said, if you really believed you were worth the $9,000, you would have flown first class. And I said, and I knew he was, I knew he was right.
Yeah.
I knew he was right. And so he said to me, he said, I forbid you to fly home any other way than first class. And now he's really scrambled my eggs, because now I have to pay to change a ticket and to upgrade. And, now there's even more. Now it's even more fees. And a one-way ticket back first class is probably $9,000 just for the one way. And I said, well, okay. And he said, you're thinking about the money, aren't you? And I said, yes, I'm thinking about the money, Bob. Of course I'm thinking about the money. He said, well, why don't you stop thinking about what it's going to cost you? And why don't you think about how you're going to sell your way out of it?
Wow.
Yeah. And
there's
from that 180.
Yeah.
And from then on, I've never flown coach. And unless there was I've never voluntarily flown coach, right? Let's put it that way. I've never flown coach. And I've always approached any single problem I've had in business that I can sell my way out of anything. As a matter of fact, I remember meeting with John Maxwell when we were starting the John Maxwell team, and Mark Cole and his team were, they were doing their job, throwing like all doom and gloom possibilities. And I just looked at Mark and David Hoyt, his two presidents, and I said, I don't care what the problem is. I can sell myself out of anything. And John just started to laugh. And he said, that's a true statement. And so that was one of the times where Bob just, I used to have these little stickman snow globes. You probably got one at one time.
Yeah.
And I always felt like the snowman in a snow globe around Bob Proctor, just on the shelf, minding my own business. And Bob would come by and just kind of take me and just like leave me twisting in pieces as he just kind of walked away. Do you
remember that? I do. I mean, it's exactly that. He does scramble your eggs. And did I share that YouTube clip with you? I think it was only a few years ago. I was having a good giggle with you about it when there was a YouTube clip somewhere of Bob on stage, and he was delivering something. And the best thing was, if you can imagine this, the stage is all lit, the camera's at the back, and so you can only see the front row or front couple of rows, and they're all silhouetted heads. Yeah. And Bob's there, and he's, as always, spruce, immaculate, the old secret white suit on, I think he was. And, Bob's delivering, and then he just spins round and he just, it's the paradigm! And every head goes out of their seats because of the way he delivered it with such energy, which was only Bob. I mean, this was a guy in his 70s at the time. I mean, the nickname of the Toronto Tornado couldn't be more appropriate for anybody. I mean, he was in his day on stage just an incredible teacher, and I mean his work scrambled my eggs in every direction, and that's the true master. And and as you spoke into earlier, Paul, that there's many people that take the stage, and we've been in this industry a long time, and we've been at the top end of it, and we are very privileged to have that experience. But there's some people that, without naming names, are there who are ankle deep in terms of their substance. Bob Proctor was oceans deep. I mean, he walked his talk in terms of his research, his non-stop dedication to self-improvement and self-discovery was an inspiration in itself, and he never stopped.
Lifelong learner.
Absolutely, there was always something new he was looking at. And what really impressed me about Bob most was what I mentioned in my post, Paul, was was that he was willing to learn material that he's been teaching for years through somebody else's perspective and grow from it. When I was up on that stage, as I mentioned, he was scribbling notes, and I, when I spoke to him afterwards, I said, and he said, well, look at my notes I've made, and I said, well, I assumed you were just getting ideas for your business. He said, he looked at me, like he did, as if to say, what plan? He said, I was taking notes from your teaching, and I was like, such an incredibly flattering things to say. So, yeah.
Well, it's funny because twice in my life before I was partners with Bob, he did the same thing for me that he did for you. He called me on like a Thursday night, like 10 o'clock at night. And he said, and I answered the phone. He said, Bob Proctor, like he needed to tell me. He said, what are you doing tomorrow? My answer was always, whatever you tell me to do, right? Whatever you tell me to do, that's what I'm doing tomorrow, right? He said, I'm going to be, he said, I'm in Orlando. I'm going to be teaching a group of insurance. Why don't you come on up and teach in the morning? And so here's a guy that doesn't need to give me his stage. Doesn't need to give me his stage. Another time he called me and he said, what are you doing this weekend? I was like, again, whatever you tell me to do. He said, why don't you meet me out in Vegas? I'm teaching the science of getting rich. I want you to come out there and teach a piece. Just, outside of Les Brown, I don't think I've ever seen another speaker do that where and Bob wouldn't just like let you go up and talk. Bob would prime the audience. He would edify you. If Bob Proctor edified you, you had been properly edified, right?
Absolutely.
And he would position you for success. And like you said, he would sit in the front row and he would take notes on what you were saying, modeling, because he knew people were looking at him.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't gonna be, out in the hallway making calls. If he positioned you, he would be in that room, either in the back right-hand corner or the front to the left of the stage, and he would be doing that. And he probably positioned more people and gave more people, because imagine having someone at Bob's caliber do what he did for you. I mean, what does that do for your confidence, right? I mean,
I think it goes beyond confidence, Paul. I think
awareness, everything.
Absolutely. When a man creates a program based on Maxwell Maltz's self-image work in psychocybernetics, that's one thing. But when a man actually does something like that through an experience to actually do that for somebody, that's a self-image transformational gift, quite frankly. And as you quite rightly pointed out, we speakers, we're very protective of the stage. We don't spend a lot of time on there. And it's something that we love doing and crave doing. And the level of generosity, and quite frankly, I will use the word deliberately, Paul, love, to actually, when you talk about character, you can be a teacher on the stage, but when you talk about congruence with your message as a man who pours into the lives of others, those whether you would call it, they're more than a gesture, those gifts to you and I, and I'm sure there are many others, unquestionably, we're tantamount to how Bob Proctor was a real force and a fully congruent force of what he stood for. It's such a precious gift. It's a priceless gift, and it's one that will stay with me for the rest of my life.
We were in Atlanta. There's two things. One is I want to highlight kind of the character of the man, and then I want to tell just a funny story.
Yeah.
We were, I forget his name, who was putting on the seminar, but he had like 10 speakers over the course of the weekend. And Bob almost always would go last. He'd let everybody else sell their stuff last. He was first, and then he would go last. And there was a guy who came up before Bob. And so this guy was, truly the last speaker, right? Because Bob, no matter where he was the headline. You know what I mean? No matter where he was in the lineup, he was the headline. So this guy was like the last, of the speakers. And then there's Bob to close out the day. And this guy, he really couldn't lead a group in silent prayer. He wasn't skilled and masterful, but Bob had this love for an underdog. And so after the guy speaks, there's this half-hour break, and Bob and I and this guy are in the green room, and Bob is asking the guy about his program, and Bob goes on stage, and for the next 20 minutes of his time, he spends selling that guy's program.
Wow.
And Bob would sell other people's stuff for them. He just, first off, Bob just loved to sell. I mean, period. Bob.
Oh yeah.
I remember.
The old calculator.
I remember being so angry at Bob Proctor. You know, I partnered with Bob in March 2006. Little did I know, 90 days after I partnered with him, The Secret came out. So, I mean, you talk about my timing to be a partner, because prior to The Secret, who knew Bob? Not many people. He was a giant in he was a shark in a pond, right? The Secret came out, and he was a whale in an ocean, right? He was huge. And so he's on Larry King. And we're like, oh my goodness, he's on Larry King Live. This is huge on CNN. And, you know, Larry King says, oh, you know, so you're a teacher, you're a philosopher. And Bob says, no, I'm a salesman. No, I'm a salesman. But he was a salesman. He loved to sell, but he also loved to help other people. So while Bob's doing we're the last speakers, he's up on stage, and in the middle of his talk, the fire alarm goes off. Full on, and Bob, like a pro, like it doesn't even hear it. Bob
not even there. Yeah.
Bob just keeps going. And then finally, because, you know, in hotels, you kind of ignore those things. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? If you stay in hotels long enough, you're not running out of the building. You're not afraid that the building's on fire. And then sure enough, you know, the red coats from the Marriott kind of come in and start, you know, everybody's got to leave the hotel. So, okay. So we all leave the hotel and we all come back, and Bob just picks right up where he was, bump right back on, gets the audience right back in the phone, command like nothing else. So now we're done. But now we're late, right? And I've got a scheduled flight home. And this, again, I'm new to working with him. And again, in my old paradigm is I've got to be at the airport 2 hours early. If I miss my flight, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to buy another ticket, and I can't do all that. And, you know, I was all caught up in the normal. I was a normal traveler. You know, I booked my flight 30 days in advance. You don't book. And so I remember going up, and people were in the back of the room, and Bob's selling, and I go up to Bob and I said, hey, look, you know, I got to go. And he grabbed me. He was angry. Grabbed me. What do you mean you got to go? I said, like, I got to get to the airport 2 hours early. Early? What are you talking about? I was like, well, I've got to get there. If I miss my flight, I'm gonna have to buy, you know, another ticket, you know, and that's gonna be like 4 times the cost of the ticket. And he said, stay here and you'll buy the effing plane.
That's all over.
So Bob, like, oh, do you see this opportunity here? Look, listen to your thinking, Paul.
It was like he walked around with a big mirror, right? This mirror that you never want to see the reflection in, and he just used to have this way of turning it in a way and almost shoving your face in it and saying, "You see that? You see that?" And you know, I was just going to say on the thing with Larry King, what a beautiful lesson that is, because you know we live in a world where you know so many people are in business, and yet they get affronted at being sold to, and yet they're happy to sell. And I'll never get that. I mean, I think selling is the most noble art in the world. I mean, if nobody sold anything, nobody would buy anything they need. And Bob Proctor in that statement, I think, is beautifully stating, I'm so proud, as I am, and I know you are, Paul, because we absolutely, I mean, hey, we sell stuff that has transformed our lives. We don't sell anything that we've never lived and breathed ourselves. I'm proud. I feel if I don't sell to anybody, I'm negligent in my duty to them. And Bob Proctor was living that in that moment and did it on the biggest stage ever. I mean, that's a beautiful lesson in itself, right? Just huge.
It's brilliant. And he would, you know, he could shift my thinking, and I'd be angry at him. I mean, I'd be genuine, like, you don't understand. It's like, don't tell me what I don't. You don't understand.
You don't.
If I had a nickel for every time I told Bob Proctor, you don't understand, I'd be a billionaire, right? And, you know, if I had a penny for every time, you know, he was right and I was wrong about what I didn't understand, I'd be a trillionaire. I mean, because he had a way of seeing the bigger picture and living from the truth of potential. I mean, he really understood, you know, the laws of the universe that he was teaching. And because of, you know, I had direct, you know, I probably spent 5 years with Bob, 3 as his business partner, and 2 as a real close student as he was grooming me for that partnership, you know? And those 5 years, I mean, I became a millionaire. I bought a house on the ocean. I sold my company. And my entire life had just, every part of my life changed, my awareness. I remember when I was first, you know, I was on the phone with him and we were talking about the business deal. And so I had met him. So I studied him from like 1991. I didn't meet him until like 2004 or 5. So I'd never met. All I knew of Bob Proctor was he was this skinny 45-year-old guy, Canadian guy on a chalkboard with red hair. That was my image of Bob Proctor. And the first time I physically met him, I flew to Atlanta to see him and John Canary actually teach Born Rich live. It was going to be like one of the last times that they were actually going to teach Born Rich live. So I was like, I'm going to go.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never knew you saw that live. Wow.
Yeah. It was the last time him and John Canary ever taught it. And it was, I cut my teeth on that. It was Thinking We're Rich in that seminar.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
so
I went up there and I remember, and I remember in that meeting, I remember telling him there was only 2 people in my life I ever wanted to meet, him and Elton John. Right. And then he would get me that opportunity with Elton John. But I remember saying, because you could joke with Bob. Bob had a great sense of humor.
Sorry to interject, Paul. Didn't he ask you in that moment, who's Elton John?
Yeah, who's he? Who's he? And so, classic. I forgot about him asking me that, and he would always ask me that. And so I said, "Oh my goodness!" I said, "Like you're Moses," because he had like this white hair and white eyebrows, and I remember him as this redheaded guy, right?
Yeah.
Here he was. I'm watching when he's 40. I'm meeting him when he's 72 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it was in that seminar that I then pay to kind of become certified. I go to become a life success consultant, and it was me and like 9 other people, and it was the worst training in the world. It was disorganized and clunky, but it was Bob for 5 days, so who cares, right? I didn't care what it was, and so he and I started to talk, and so he's now selling me into buying Life Success Consulting and becoming his partner. And it's going to cost me $300,000 to be kind of mentored and have ownership. And of course, in order for me to come up with the $300,000, I was going to sell my business. And that was a requirement of his, is that you have to sell your business because I want all of your energy in this, and we're going to do this. And I said, well, I wasn't sure. And he said, listen to me. He said, I'm operating at such a level of awareness that you can't even understand. You can't even understand. He said, I will show you things that are right in front of your face that you don't even see right now. I will show you things about your potential that you don't even know. And he said it with such authority and such certainty and such belief that I listed my business for sale. And within 90 days, I sold the business, and I found myself in that room in London as his partner. And he did. I mean, he expanded my awareness of my potential far beyond. I don't want to say that I would never have gotten there, but this is what you do in the lives of other people. I'd like to think that this is what I do in the lives of other people as we mentor, is that we help people see their potential. And it's not that they couldn't get there themselves, but potential is one of those things that you don't see in yourself. And it takes somebody really skilled to help you get beyond your own limiting beliefs so that you can actually see it and then actually believe it and then actually act on that belief, and working with Bob and having Bob's influence in your life and in my life and for millions of people around the world. Bob could bend the law of gender. He could bend the time that it would take somebody to move in that level of awareness. And I think if you've learned anything from his body of work, and I've learned anything, it's that skill to do that for other people.
Absolutely. And, I was just thinking when you shared that story, Paul, that, those comments coming from anybody else would be an extreme act of arrogance. Well, arrogance, extraordinary arrogance to come from a place like that. But I was picturing as you shared it, if Bob had said those words to me, and I would have had the same response, not reaction, as you did, because he had you felt the energy, it's not charisma. It was you felt that about Bob. I remember going up to him when I first met. Do you remember when I came in June 2007, and The Secret had just come out, and we went to do that gig at West Palm Beach, and there must have been 5, 7, 8,000 people there or more. I can't remember. It was
the Civic Center.
Yeah. And I went up to Bob at the end of that because we had that privilege as life success consultants, and Bob had mentioned that he can always tell from someone's energy where they're at. And I said, "So Bob, where am I at?" And he pulled back and he looked me up and down. He said, "You're an extremely confident young man, very secure in yourself." He said, "But you've got an insecurity that you hide with humor." He nailed me in 2.5 sentences. And I think my jaw went open. I just thought, you could pay a therapist for 2 decades to try and get anywhere near that. And there he is in 2 sentences. I think that's only just come back to me in our conversation here. But I mean, I'm not, when he said that statement, he's a man that could carry that off because he's speaking truth. He's not speaking from ego. He's not speaking from, any kind of manipulation. He's speaking truth because he was whole. He was whole with his message. He was whole with his work. And as you say, a lifelong learner. And, you talked about how our work together is to raise consciousness and to help people become conscious of that which they're unconscious to in themselves, both their limiting beliefs that hold them back and also the awareness they're not aware of, Paul. I remember one of the most powerful teachings that I heard from your mouth, actually, during my life success years, was how, our existing results are not an expression of our potential. They're an expression of our current awareness of our potential. That statement in itself just transformed my life to understand that. But it was about awareness. Everything comes down to awareness. And Bob Proctor, he wouldn't be known in the coaching world. I mean, hands up, you've always called me the purist, and I am unquestionably true coaching, not the misused, overrepresented, and abused, quite frankly, word that we have in the world today. Everyone's a coach these days. Everyone's dog's a coach these days. I'm talking about true coaching. Bob wouldn't position himself as a purist coach, never would. And but his body of work and his direct involvement in my life. I mentioned earlier that the G word that was in Winner's Image, and Bob's work there helped put in the last pieces of the jigsaw that was missing for me. Because here's what was happening at the time, Paul. I've been coaching by the time I came into the life success world for 6 years. And as you know, I was working in some of Europe's largest organizations, Siemens, BT Global Services, people like that at the highest level, coaching leaders, and very grateful for those opportunities. I'd only recently become aware that, even though it's been happening for a long time, that when fully present in the coaching role, the questions I asked to another person, I wasn't thinking into because I was fully present. I'm getting my conscious mind out of the way, being fully present. And these questions were presented to my conscious mind in the dance of the moment. Now, this scrambles a few people's eggs in itself when I first explain it. But when they experience coaching, as a coach, they get it. But my reason for sharing this is that Bob introduced me to the inherent source intelligence that, in my view, is at the center of all things, from which all things spring, ourselves included. That part of us that we call intuition, the teacher within that seeks to inform us through our feelings. But that intelligence was feeding these questions to me. Now, what that did for me, Paul, then was to actually help me understand that same question then bypassed the conscious mind, the intellectual mind, which is where I was living prior to Bob's work, bypassed the conscious mind in the participant that I was coaching. And actually spoke into that same source within that individual to make conscious what was unconscious to them. That, Paul, that took my coaching ability and my ability to teach coaching, which you have so wonderfully, my friend, helped me take to levels that I would never imagine through our work together with your work with Life Success and with the John Maxwell team. If I had not had Bob Proctor in my life, if I had not had Paul Martinelli in my life, and I had not had the privilege of having you both as very close teachers, that would never have come to me in my lifetime. And I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned your 5 years with Bob. Let me ask you, Paul, what do you think that was worth in terms of your growth in proportion to your lifetime? And let's hope that that's 100 years.
Look, I paid Bob. I wrote Bob Proctor 2 checks, right? The first check I paid, I think it was $15,000 to become certified to teach, Born Rich and the Winner's Image and the Success Puzzle and Mission and Commission, right? To teach his 5 programs. The next check I wrote to Bob Proctor was $300,000. And that was to have a seat at the table, okay? To have a seat at the table, to be his business partner, and for Bob Proctor to open doors for me. Now, I'm 56 years old, and you're in your 50s. I'm probably the only speaker from maybe 65 years old down who shared the stage 3 times with Zig Ziglar, who shared the stage with Wayne Dyer, And when I say share the stage, I mean like they were talking in the morning and I spoke in the, I mean, like I had private time with these guys, Brian Tracy, Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Les Brown, Dennis Waitley. All of those giants before me taught me something about who I am today and about my body of work and about what I do. I would never have had those opportunities. That is priceless. To have Bob's thinking, you know, I was 39 years old when I met Bob Proctor in person. He had been speaking in my life since I was 23. I meet him at 39 and I work with him for the next 5 or 6 years. If you study Think and Grow Rich and you read the chapter of transmutation of sexual energy, and you understand what happens in men in their 40s, in their early 40s, what could happen to them, positive or negative. Bob's influence in my life changed the trajectory of everything. So by the time I met Bob, I had already had the understanding of all the teaching. I had all the teaching, but what I hadn't had was the walking of the teaching, right? Like I had lived it in my own experience to some level, but every single day, well, Bob would, for nearly 5 years, I was on the phone with Bob Proctor. I was in an airplane with Bob Proctor. I was on a cruise ship with Bob Proctor. I was in a seminar room with Bob Proctor. We were in hotel rooms together. And Bob couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself. Every moment was a teaching moment. Every moment was him just tweaking and challenging and poking and prodding. I don't know. I know that before meeting Bob, I had built a multi-million-dollar commercial cleaning business. After meeting Bob, I would go on to build 6 multi-million-dollar companies that would generate nearly $1 billion in sales. I could never think that big without Bob Proctor.
So that's huge. And there's a couple of other things that you said are huge there, Paul. I think what's massive is how all those teachings that, you know, we can, there's a big difference between listening to personal growth material and self-help material and internalizing it. There's a difference between knowing and understanding. And you know, I can imagine how profoundly powerful after all those years with your cleaning company. I want to come back to that cleaning company in a moment. How profoundly powerful it was for you to have that internalization through the close proximity and observation of it being made flesh through the very voice that had spoken to you. So, you know, that concept of it going from principle to actually, you know, behavior must have been an incredible education in itself. Yeah. And there's no greater proof to that. And this is something that you haven't touched on directly, because you're despite however hard you try, you're a very humble, loving guy. I'm sorry I let that out in the public domain, Paul, because but you know, to hand over $300K might not sound a lot when you've talked about running multi-million-dollar businesses, but you hadn't at that stage. And let's be clear, you had been in poverty, absolutely, with your last your last $200. I remember you handing over to Dan Kennedy, I seem to recall, years ago. But my point being is, when you've come from that place and you've sold your company for X amount and made yourself a millionaire, it's easy to think, well, you know, 300K of $1 million, it still leaves Paul with 700K. That's just not the reality of it. That is hard earned. And anybody who's built any kind of wealth knows that actually the challenge of building wealth is not building it, it's keeping it.
Amen.
And to hand that over to somebody must have been we have a term in the UK called the squeaky bum moment. I can imagine your stomach was turning knots like you wouldn't believe on the promise and the belief in that man. But boy, have you taken that mantle, and have you taken Bob's challenge? And have you for me, I'm not a kind of guy who blows smoke where the sun doesn't shine, but I can only imagine that Bob went to the next phase of his soul's evolution. Incredibly proud of you as a protege, of you carrying his legacy so beautifully as you have, and created what you have created in the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. We talk about the impact of Bob Proctor, and so we should, to honor the man who had such a profound impact on our lives. And we were talking about Bob, Born Rich here, Paul. I go out on my bike rides early in the morning here, whatever time of year it is, in the darkness, and I can stick Born Rich on. And I've been listening to it for years, like you do, and there's always so much more to it, because it's not that the words have changed, and it's not that the deliverables changed. It was recorded in 1988, but there's so much depth to the work that there's always light bulbs going on in left. I could say it verbatim. But my point being is what you have done in your legacy, and you're only a wee nipper at 56. I can imagine Bob is incredibly proud of what you've done, Paul, because he should be.
Well, thank you.
No doubt he was.
And I think that his legacy through his work now with Sandy Gallagher and the Proctor Gallagher Institute will live on. But I think his greatest legacy is going to be through those couple of thousand people that went through Life Success Consulting, and really who went to a hotel room and spent 5 days in the presence of one of the great masters of our industry. And you talked about me going and checking the hotel rooms. It's why I don't say the F word on stage. But I learned from Bob. Bob was the pro. Bob would wear the suit on stage. He would never swear on stage. The stage was sacred to him, and he always wanted a level of excellence. And so when I partnered with him and we started Life Success Consulting, and we're doing these events, I took that like really seriously. That I was representing him and his name, and so I made sure, and I look now at the tens of thousands of people that we've trained. I think, certainly you and I've probably influenced the thinking of more coaches and speakers than just about anybody else alive, or maybe even dead, in our work. And I see those people who go and they lead their first mastermind group with 8 people, and they put a picture on Facebook, and they have all their resources lined up perfectly, and they have name tags, and they've made their room, whatever, the small meeting room, whatever it is, as beautiful as they can make it. And I know that they learned that through the standards that Bob imparted to me, that I perpetuated. And so,
well, but just bear in mind, let me take you back to 2007 and a photograph I sent you of my room when I was doing my masterminds, because I was that person. So absolutely, and it's a very precious gift that level of excellence. It reminds me, Paul, I remember in that same building, there was I don't know if you remember, there was a guy a very kind guy. The building's gone now, by the way, where that beautiful library was that I was doing my masterminds in. But there was an auditorium, 300 purpose-built auditorium. And I put my first seminar on. And I had a Proctor moment, because he teaches how, in his first seminar, they'd done this big sales push, and he was, looking forward to a packed house. And it happened to me, Paul. I peeked around the curtain. I looked out, and there were 4 people in this 350-seat auditorium with 2 minutes before I was kicking off, of which 4 people, of which 3 I'd brought with me, my wife, and 2 of my friends. And all I could hear in my ear was Proctor saying about his story about when the same happened to him when he was working with Earl Nightingale. And all I could hear was, Christian, a pro is at their best regardless. And I went out there and did 2 hours, killer 2 hours, for where I was at the time. And those are the moments that if you don't have that voice that you speak of, Paul, that one voice, that at that level of excellence, you crumble, you walk away, and the potential that we talk about, that we help others live into, the awareness that brings that potential to the fore is gone forever. The opportunity of life's gift to you that you turned away from, it's gone forever. I would not have enjoyed the work that I enjoy with you, and I've enjoyed ever since, if that moment I crumbled, and if it wasn't for you and Bob, I would have.
Yeah, wow. Well, how blessed are we to be 2 guys doing what we love to do, with people we love to do it with, and having been mentored by somebody that we really loved and who was operating at the top of their game. And so before we end, I just want to acknowledge Raymond and Brian and Colleen, Bob's 3 children, and his grandchildren, his wife Linda, and somebody that probably loved Bob more than anybody in the world could love, Gina Hayden, who had been she was Bob's right hand, my goodness, before Bob Proctor was Bob Proctor, and Gina was protective and loved Bob, and really embodied his message as well. So, we send our thoughts and our prayers and our love to everybody,
Absolutely.
to all of you who love Bob Proctor. Take a moment this weekend and think of your own Bob Proctor moment. Put them in the comments. We'd love to hear them, and know that we join you in hurting and feeling a sad feeling in our hearts.
Avoid
the passing of Bob. Avoid. And
avoid, but a celebration, Paul, too.
Absolutely.
Of a fantastic life.
Yeah. Amazing. So, well, thank you, Christian. Thanks for helping me kind of honor and pay tribute to certainly probably my third mentor in my life. I had Curtis Sliwa, and I had Patrick Hayes, and then I had Bob Proctor. And and I'm grateful for all three of those men in my life. So thank you, my friend. Thanks so much for joining.
Well, thank you for inviting me, for the great privilege of doing this with you, Paul. And I would love to put our heads together and think about how we can take the legacy of Bob and continue it in a way that honors him too. Whatever that might look like. And for me, it doesn't get any better than Born Rich. I think, we're two people that have lived and taught that, and that would be really interesting to do. But anyway, that's just come to me as we've just been speaking here, whatever comes of that. But that'd be a beautiful way of honoring the man. But been a real privilege to do this today. Thank you for asking me to do it. And it's always great to spend some time with you, but great, even more great, reminiscing about the great man himself. God bless you, Bob.
You bet. God bless, Bob. Be well.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks everybody for joining in. Be well. Bye-bye.